Tonight we begin with something simple, something you already know, though you may have forgotten. Somewhere deep inside you, beneath the noise of the day, beneath the plans and the worries and the things left undone, there is a place that has always been quiet. It has been waiting for you, not with urgency, not with expectation, just the way a lantern waits by a door on a dark evening, patiently, softly, for as long as it takes. And here you are. You have found your way back to this stillness again. Whatever brought you here tonight, whether it was a long day, a restless mind, or simply the wish for something gentle before sleep, you are welcome. You are in the right place. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. It is always nice to know we are resting together from different corners of the world, under different skies. Someone is listening now while the rain falls outside their window. Someone else is lying in a dark room where the only sound is their own breathing. And you, wherever you are, whatever your sky like tonight, you are part of this too. A quiet gathering of people who have decided that tonight, rest comes first. Tonight, we will walk through some of the oldest and most beautiful teachings the Buddha ever offered, stories that have traveled across centuries, passed from one quiet voice to another, in temples and along forest paths, and beside rivers at dusk. These are teachings that have helped people sleep a little easier for over 2,500 years. They are not theories. They are not philosophies meant for lecture halls. They are gentle truths about what it means to be human, to love, to struggle, to let go, to find peace in unexpected places. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism to receive what is offered here. These are not lessons to memorize or rules to follow. They are simply stories, invitations to rest. There is nothing you need to understand, nothing you need to remember. If something lands gently in your heart tonight, that is enough. If nothing lands at all, that is enough too. You cannot do this wrong. The only thing asked of you is to be here. And you are already doing that. If this path of quiet stories calls to something in you, you are welcome to subscribe and return to this space whenever you need a slower night. So settle in now. Let your body grow heavy. Let the surface beneath you take your full weight. You do not need to hold yourself up anymore. Take a slow, deep breath, and as you exhale, let the day leave you, not with force, but the way mist lifts from a field when the sun arrives. Gently, naturally, in its own time. And let us begin our journey together. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. We will begin tonight, not with a teaching, but with a story. Because the best teachings have always arrived that way, not as instructions, but as something you overhear, something that slips past the thinking mind and lands somewhere deeper. The way a song you heard as a child can still bring tears to your eyes decades later, even when you cannot remember the words. In a town where the smell of bread drifted through the streets before dawn, there lived a woman who kept a garden. It was not a large garden, just a small square of earth behind her house, bordered by a low stone wall that her grandfather had built when he was young. She had tended it for almost 30 years. Every morning, before the sun touched the rooftops, she would walk out in her bare feet and stand among her plants. The stones of the path were cool and slightly damp. The air at that hour smelled of earth and dew, and the faint sweetness of jasmine that grew along the wall. She knew each plant the way you might know the face of a friend. The roses along the south wall that bloomed late, but held their color longer than any she had seen. The herbs by the kitchen door, whose scent lifted when you brushed them with your hand. releasing something green and sharp and alive. The old fig tree in the corner that gave shade in summer and dropped its leaves in autumn like quiet confessions, falling one by one onto the dark soil. She loved this garden with a love that had deepened over the years into something almost physical. It was in her hands, in the soil beneath her nails, in the ache of her back when she knelt too long beside the tomato beds. She had planted seeds here on the morning her daughter was born. She had pruned roses here on the afternoon her mother died. The garden held all of it. Every season, every loss, every small triumph. The warmth of the soil in July, when you pressed your palm flat against the earth. The silence of December, when everything slept beneath a thin blanket of frost. And perhaps that was why the letter frightened her so much. The letter said that the road was coming through, a new road wider than the old one, and it would cut through the eastern side of her property. The garden would be halved. The fig tree would go. The stone wall her grandfather had built would be taken down. She read the letter 3 times and then sat at her kitchen table without moving for a very long time. The tea she had made grew cold. The light moved across the floor. She did not notice. That evening, she walked to the house of an old neighbor. He was a retired teacher who had lived in the town longer than anyone. His own house was modest, and his own garden had been paved over years ago to make room for a small workshop where he repaired clocks. The faint sound of ticking was always in the air around his house, as though time itself lived there. She found him sitting on his front step, drinking tea from a cup that was older than most of the neighbors' children, watching the swallows circle above the rooftops in the last gold light of the day. She sat beside him and told him about the letter. She told him about the fig tree and the stone wall and the roses that would be dug up. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he took a slow sip of tea and said nothing for a while. The swallows moved in wide arcs above them. Then he asked, "Do you remember the winter when the pipes froze and the old elm split in half?" She nodded. "I thought the garden would never recover." And did it? It did, but it was different after. The light changed because the elm was gone. Things grew in places they had not grown before. He nodded slowly. The garden you have now is not the garden you planted 30 years ago. It has changed 100 times. You just did not notice because the changes were slow. She looked at him. But this is not slow. This is everything at once. Yes, he said gently. That is what makes it hard. Not the change itself, but the speed of it. We are built for slow goodbyes. The fast ones break something in us. So what do I do? He set down his cup. You do what you have always done. You grieve what is leaving, and then you plant something new. Not because the new thing is better, but because that is what gardeners do. They keep planting. They keep beginning. They sat together for a long time after that. The swallows disappeared, and the sky turned the color of plums. She did not feel better, exactly, but something in her chest had loosened. Not because the problem was solved, but because she had begun to see it differently. She had been holding the garden as if it were something she could keep forever. As if love meant permanence, and perhaps what the old neighbor was gently showing her, without ever saying it directly, was that she had been holding on to a version of something that had already changed many times over. The garden she was mourning was not the garden that existed. It was the garden she had built in her mind, fixed, unchanging, forever hers. What she was touching though she might not have had words for it, is one of the oldest teachings the Buddha ever offered. He called it upadana, clinging, not in a dramatic way, simply the way a doctor might say, you are holding your breath. It is the habit of wrapping our fingers so tightly around something, a place, a person, a version of ourselves, that we forget we are gripping at all, and the suffering comes not from the thing we love, but from the tightness of the grip. Think of it this way. When you hold a bird gently in your open hands, it stays, it feels safe, it can rest. But the moment you close your fingers around it, two things happen. The bird panics, and your hands ache. You were trying to keep it close, but the keeping is what drove it away. The attachment itself became the distance. This is what the Buddha saw. Not that love is the problem, but that the way we love, gripping, clutching, refusing to let the thing be what it is, that is where the pain begins. We do this with everything. We do it with people. We build an image of who they are, and then we love the image. And when the person changes, as people always do, we feel abandoned. But they did not leave. They simply grew. And our image of them could not follow. We do it with ourselves. We decide who we are at 25, and then we spend the next 30 years defending that decision, even when it no longer fits. Even when the person we have become is larger and deeper and more complex than the one we decided to be. The Buddha once said that in the end, only three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. This is not a teaching about giving up. It is a teaching about opening your hands. There is a difference between releasing something and losing it. When you release, you are choosing. When you lose, you are caught off guard. And much of our pain comes not from what life takes from us, but from our refusal to let it go when its time has come. Have you ever held something so tightly, a hope, a memory, a version of yourself, that your hands ached from the gripping? And then, one day, for no particular reason, you let go, and what you felt was not loss. It was relief, like setting down a bag you had been carrying for so long that you forgot it was heavy, like stepping out of shoes that were too tight and feeling the cool ground beneath your feet for the first time in hours. The world did not change, but you did. This is what the Buddha was pointing toward. Not that we should stop caring, not that love is a mistake, but that there is a way to love without strangling, a way to hold things gently, the way you might hold water in your palms. You can feel it, you can be nourished by it. But the moment you squeeze, it slips through, and the tighter you squeeze, the faster it goes. Thich Nhat Hanh once put it this way: letting go gives us freedom, and freedom is the only condition for happiness. Not the freedom of having nothing, but the freedom of not being owned by what you have. Not the emptiness of a bare room, but the lightness of open hands. There is an old parable about this. A traveler was crossing a wide river. The current was strong, and the water was cold, and he could not swim. He found a small raft made of reeds and branches, and he used it to get to the other side. The raft served him well. It saved his life, in fact. The water pushed against it, and the wind tried to turn it, but the raft held. When he reached the far bank, wet and shivering but alive, he stood on solid ground and looked at the raft with deep gratitude. But then he faced a choice. Should he carry the raft on his back for the rest of his journey, in case he found another river? Or should he set it down with gratitude and continue with lighter steps? The Buddha himself told this story, and the teaching is simple. What carries you through one season may weigh you down in the next. The wisdom is knowing when to set it down. Not because it was not valuable, but because you have arrived somewhere new. And new ground requires free hands. There is another way to see this. Imagine you are standing in a stream. The water moves around your ankles cold and clear. Leaves float past. Small sticks a feather, white and spinning slowly. If you reach down and grab one of these things, say the feather, and hold it tightly in your fist, the stream keeps moving. The water presses against your hand. You feel the resistance. You feel the effort of holding. And feather, once it was free and beautiful, and part of the current, is now crushed and damp in your closed palm. You have not saved it. You have only removed it from the place where it was alive. The Buddha once gently reminded us, you only lose what you cling to. The feather was never yours. It was the stream's, and the stream was offering it to you for exactly one moment. The gift was not the feather. The gift was the seeing in another village, on the other side of mountains, that no one had named. There lived an old man who carved wooden bowls. His workshop was a single room attached to his house, with a wide window that looked out over a valley where fog gathered in the mornings, like a slow white river. The smell of cedar shavings was always in the air, sweet and clean, mixed with the faint warmth of the wood stove that burned in the corner even on mild days. His tools hung from hooks on the wall, each one worn smooth from decades of use. The chisels gleamed where his thumb had rubbed them 1,000 times. The mallets were dark with oil and age. He worked slowly, methodically, the way rivers work on stone. There was no hurry in his hands. He had been carving bowls for 40 years, and in that time, he had given away more bowls than he could count. He did not sell them. He gave them to anyone who came to his door. Fishermen and farmers and school teachers and children. Some people traveled a great distance to receive one because the bowls were beautiful in a way that was hard to explain. They were simple, undecorated, no patterns, no paint. But when you held one in your hands, you felt something, a weight, a warmth, as if the wood still remembered being part of a living tree, as if it carried the memory of rain and wind and all the slow years of growing. One afternoon, a young woman came to his door. She was a school teacher from a nearby town, and she had heard about the bowl maker from a friend who had received one as a wedding gift. She wanted a bowl, but more than that. She wanted to understand something. There was a question she had been carrying for a long time, and she thought perhaps this man, who spent his days shaping wood, might know the answer. People say, your bowls are special, she said, standing in the doorway of his workshop. What makes them different from other bowls? The old man set down his chisel and wiped his hands on his leather apron. He looked at her the way you might look at a student who has just asked exactly the right question without knowing it. I do not know if they are special, he said. I only know that when I carve, I try not to hold on to what the bowl should look like. I have an idea, yes, but the wood has its own ideas, its own grain, its own knots, its own memory. And if I insist on my version, the bowl suffers. But if I let the wood show me where it wants to go, something happens that neither of us planned. But how do you know when it is finished? He smiled, and the wrinkles around his eyes deepened. When I stop wanting it to be more than it is. She sat with that for a moment. The workshop was quiet, except for the soft crackle of the wood stove. That sounds like it could apply to more than bowls. It could, he said. Most people spend their lives trying to carve themselves into something they have imagined. A better version, a more successful version, a version that others will admire. And there is nothing wrong with growth. Nothing wrong with wanting to improve. But sometimes the carving is finished, and we keep scraping. We keep trying to improve what is already whole. We sand down the parts of ourselves that do not match the picture in our heads. And that is where the suffering begins. Not in the imperfection, but in the refusal to accept what is already enough. She looked at the bowl in his hands. It was not perfect. There was a slight unevenness on one side, a knot in the wood that he had not tried to hide, and yet it was beautiful. Perhaps because of those things, not despite them. He handed it to her. "Take this," he said, "and when you hold it, remember the bowl does not wish to be a vase. It does not compare itself to the bowls that came before it. It does not worry about the bowls that will come after. It simply is what it is, and that is its freedom." The young teacher walked home that evening as the sun was going down behind the hills. The valley was gold, and the shadows were long, and the air was cool on her face. The bowl sat in her arms like something alive, warm from the workshop, smooth against her skin. She did not know yet what she had received. It would take time. The understanding would come slowly, the way morning comes, not all at once, but in degrees of light. But something had already shifted in her, the way a door shifts when you unlock it, even before you push it open. She had spent years gripping her idea of who she should be, and for the first time, she felt the possibility that she might already be enough. Not because she had achieved everything, but because the gripping itself was the only thing making her feel incomplete. And perhaps tonight, as you lie here, you are holding something too. Not a bowl, but a thought, maybe a worry, a regret, something from the day that you have carried into this darkness with you. And perhaps you do not need to solve it tonight. Perhaps you do not need to do anything with it at all. Perhaps it is enough to notice that you are holding it, and to feel even slightly the possibility of loosening your grip. Pema Chödrön once said that nothing ever goes away until it has taught us what we need to know. So if something is still with you tonight, trust that it is there for a reason, but also trust that you do not need to carry it while you sleep. You can set it down beside the bed the way you set down your shoes. It will still be there in the morning if you need it, but for now, your hands can rest. Your fingers can uncurl, and you can simply be here without holding anything at all. And if your breath has softened a little since we began, that is not something you need to create. It is something your body remembers when the grip loosens. The body is wiser than we think. It knows how to let go long before the mind figures it out. When you are ready, we will continue together. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Feel the weight of your body against whatever is holding you. Notice what has begun to soften since we started this journey. The shoulders, perhaps. The space behind your eyes. The hands wherever they are resting. Something in you has already started to change, even if you cannot name it. That is how these stories work. Not through the mind, but through something quieter, something deeper, something that does not need words to understand. The night grows deeper. The air outside is cooler now, and there is another thread I would like to follow with you tonight. It is related to what we have just explored, because in a way, all of the Buddha's teachings are related. They are different doors into the same room, different paths up the same mountain. And this next path begins with a simple question. Why do we hold on so tightly? What are we afraid of? And what would happen if we were not afraid? There is a thread in the Buddha's teaching that runs through everything he ever said. It is not complicated. It is not hidden. In fact, it is so obvious that most of us overlook it entirely. The Buddha once offered this gentle observation: all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your own well-being with care. These were among his very last words, not a grand philosophical statement, but a quiet reminder. Everything that has a beginning also has an ending. And this is not something to fear. It is something to rest into. We see this, of course. We see it every day. The morning light changes as the hours pass. The coffee grows cold in its cup. The conversation ends. The season turns. A child's hand, once small enough to fit inside your palm, grows larger than your own. But knowing this and feeling it are two very different things. We know that things change, and yet we are surprised every time when they do. We plan as though tomorrow is guaranteed. We build as though nothing will fall. And when something shifts, a relationship, a job, a feeling we thought would last, we feel betrayed. As if the world broke a promise it never made. But the world never promised us permanence. The world promised us this moment, and then this one, and then this one. That is all it has ever offered. And when you look at it that way, it is not less, it is astonishingly, heartbreakingly more. Impermanence is not a punishment. It is the nature of things. The way water is wet, the way fire is warm. It is not something that happens to us. It is the fabric of which everything is made, including us, including these words you are hearing now, which exist only in the moment they reach your ears, and then are gone, including this breath you are taking, which has never happened before, in exactly this way, including this night, which will end as all nights do, with a softening of the dark and a slow return of light. And yet when we begin to truly accept it, not just understand it intellectually, but let it settle into our bones, the way warmth settles into cold hands, when you wrap them around a cup of tea, something extraordinary happens. We begin to pay attention. We begin to notice the things we usually rush past. The way the light falls across a table in the afternoon. The sound of someone we love laughing in another room. The taste of bread, fresh and warm. The weight of a blanket on a cold night. These small moments become vast when we understand that they will not come again in exactly this way. This exact configuration of light and sound and feeling has never happened before and will never happen again. It is singular, it is unrepeatable, and it is yours. In a small fishing village, at the edge of a long grey coast, there lived a man who repaired nets. He had done this work since he was a boy, learning from his father, who had learned from his father before him. 3 generations of hands doing the same quiet work. The nets came to him torn and tangled, heavy with salt and seaweed and the memory of storms, and he would sit on an overturned boat by the shore, his fingers moving through the mesh with a patience that seemed impossible to anyone watching. The air smelled of brine and damp rope and the cold mineral scent of rocks washed by the tide. Seabirds called from somewhere above, their voices thin and sharp against the grey sky. The water lapped gently at the stones, a rhythm so steady it was almost a kind of breathing. His hands were rough and brown from years of this work. His fingernails were short and stained with the dark residue of tar and salt. But his movements were precise and unhurried. Each knot he tied was small and tight and perfectly placed. He could mend a torn net in the dark by feel alone. His father had taught him that. His father had said that the hands remember what the eyes forget. He was a quiet man, not unfriendly, but not given to conversation. People in the village respected him because he did his work well and asked for nothing beyond what was fair. But there was something in his eyes that some of the older villagers noticed, a heaviness, not sadness exactly, more like a weight he had been carrying so long it had become part of the way he moved, part of the way he held his head, part of the way he looked at the sea in the evenings, as if he were waiting for something that was never going to come back. His wife had died 3 years ago. She had been sick for a long time, and he had cared for her in the last month with a tenderness that surprised even his closest friends. He had learned to cook the soups she liked. He had brushed her hair when her hands could no longer hold the brush. He had sat beside her bed in the long evenings and read to her from the books she had loved when she was young. After she was gone, he did not speak of her. He continued his work. He mended nets. He walked along the shore in the early mornings and the late evenings when the light was low and soft and the beach was empty and the heaviness stayed. One morning, a woman he did not recognize appeared at the shore. She was older, perhaps 10 years his senior, with white hair pulled back and a walking stick she did not seem to need. Her face was weathered but calm, the kind of calm that comes not from avoiding difficulty, but from having walked through it. She watched him work for a while without speaking. Finally she said, "You tie good knots." He glanced up. "Thank you, but you are mending more than nets." He stopped, his hands went still in his lap. The wind moved the hair across his forehead. "What do you mean?" She sat down on the stones beside him, arranging her walking stick across her knees. "I lost my husband 11 years ago, and for a long time I tried to keep everything exactly as it was. His chair in the same place, his coat on the same hook, his reading glasses on the table by the bed. I thought, if I could stop things from changing, I could stop missing him. If the house stayed the same, maybe the loss would not be real." "Did it work?" "No," she said, and there was something like a smile in her voice. "It made it worse, because everything around me kept moving. The seasons, the tides, the children growing older, the neighbors painting their houses new colors, and I was standing still, holding on to a shape that did not exist anymore. I was living in a museum of what used to be." He said nothing for a moment. The waves moved against the stones. A gull landed nearby and regarded them with one bright eye. Then quietly he said, "So, what did you do?" "I let the chair be moved. I let the coat be given to someone who needed it. Not all at once. Slowly over many months. And what I discovered was not that I missed him less. I still miss him. Every single day. But the missing changed. It became lighter. More like a warmth than a wound. More like gratitude than grief." He looked down at the net in his hands. The mesh was still and silver in the morning light. "I am afraid that if I let go, I will forget her." The old woman reached over and touched the net gently. "Look at this. Every knot you have ever tied in this net is gone. The rope has been replaced 100 times. The threads your father tied have long since frayed and been cut away. And yet the net is still the net. The shape holds, even when the material changes. That is how love works. The form changes. The vessel changes. But the feeling does not. It finds new places to live." He did not respond right away, but something in his posture shifted. The heaviness in his shoulders did not disappear, but it moved, it redistributed. Like water finding a new level after a stone has been removed. An old Zen teacher once said that the only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. This is not resignation. It is the deepest kind of courage, the courage to love something fully, knowing it will not stay the same. To sit beside someone and feel the full weight of the moment, knowing the moment will pass. To be here, completely here, with no guarantee of what comes next. There is a kind of tree that grows along mountain rivers in the high places of the world. Its roots reach deep into the bank, and its branches bend over the water. When the river rises in the spring thaw, the water rushes against the trunk with tremendous force, enough to move boulders, enough to reshape the bank itself. But the tree does not break. It does not try to stop the river. It bends its branches deep into the current, and then rise again when the water recedes. Season after season, year after year, the tree remains, not because it is stronger than the river, but because it has learned what many of us spend a lifetime learning. That strength is not rigidity. Strength is the ability to move with what comes and return to yourself when it passes. The tree does not mourn the shape of last year's branches. It does not compare this spring's leaves to the ones that fell in October. It simply grows into whatever shape the river and the wind and the light require. And in doing so, it becomes more beautiful with age, not less, more complex, more deeply rooted, more itself. This is what impermanence offers us, if we let it, not loss after loss after loss, but the chance to become more fully ourselves with each change, the chance to be shaped by what we have loved and what we have lost into something we could never have planned. Shunryu Suzuki once wrote that in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few. And perhaps impermanence is what keeps us beginners. Every morning is new. Every breath is unrepeatable. Every conversation is happening for the first and only time. If we could truly feel this, truly let it in, we would not need to be taught how to pay attention. Attention would be the most natural thing in the world. We would look at each other the way we look at sunsets, with wonder, with the ache of knowing it will not last, with the fullness that comes from being present for something beautiful. If you have ever watched a candle burn down to the end of its wick, you have seen impermanence teaching without words. The flame does not fight its own ending. It does not reach for more wax. It does not try to burn brighter in its final moments to prove it was worth lighting. It simply burns, and then gently it goes out, and what is left is not nothing. It is the warmth in the room, the softness of the light that was there a moment ago, still living in your eyes, the memory of having been present for something quiet and complete, a candle that burned, a flame that gave what it had, and then rested. The Buddha said that just as a candle cannot burn without fire, we cannot live without a spiritual life. But perhaps the deeper teaching is even simpler than that. The candle does not grieve its own burning. It simply gives its light, moment by moment, until the giving is done. In a monastery high in the mountains, where the mornings were cold and the air was thin and clear as glass, a young monk was assigned the task of tending the monastery garden. He took to it with great enthusiasm. He rose before the other monks and walked through the dew-wet grass in the thin light of dawn. He cleared the weeds with care, pulling each one gently from the root. He enriched the soil with compost from the kitchen. He planted seeds with the precision of someone writing a letter to someone he loved, placing each one at the right depth, the right distance, the right angle to catch the morning sun. He watered every morning and checked the growth of each seedling as if it were a child taking its first steps. Within a few months, the garden was the most beautiful it had ever been. Flowers bloomed in colors the other monks had never seen. Deep violet, pale gold, a white so pure it seemed to glow in the evening light. Vegetables grew thick and green. The young monk was proud. He had created something beautiful out of bare earth and patience. Then came the frost. It arrived early that year, without warning, rolling down from the peaks like a white silence. In a single night, the garden was destroyed. The flowers blackened. The vegetables wilted into soft, dark shapes against the frozen ground. The soil hardened into something that no longer felt like earth at all, but stone. The young monk stood in the morning light and stared at the ruin and wept. His breath made small white clouds in the cold air. The abbot found him there. He was an old man, thin and slow, who had lived in the monastery for over 50 years. He had seen many gardens and many frosts. He stood beside the young monk and looked at what remained. It was so beautiful. The young monk said, "Yes," the abbot said. "It was, and now it is gone." The abbot knelt slowly, his old knees protesting, and picked up a blackened petal from the ground. He held it gently in his palm as if it were still alive. "Tell me," he said, "when you planted the seeds, did you expect them to bloom forever?" "No, but I did not expect them to die so soon." "And yet they bloomed. They gave everything they had. Every color, every fragrance, every inch of reaching toward the light. They held nothing back. Is that not enough?" The young monk looked at the petal in the old man's hand. "I wanted more time with them." "Of course you did. That is what love sounds like. But more time is not what makes something precious. The opposite is true. It is the ending that makes the blooming matter. A flower that lasted forever would be furniture. It would sit in the corner, and we would stop seeing it. It is the leaving that makes it a flower." The young monk did not fully understand that morning. The words were too large for the feeling. But over the years, as he planted and lost and planted again, as the seasons turned and the frosts came and went without apology, he began to feel what the old abbot had meant, not in his mind, but in his hands, in the way he touched the soil, in the way he no longer asked these seeds to promise him anything. He planted with love and with open hands, and the gardens that grew from those open hands were always more beautiful than the ones he had tried to hold on to, because they were free, because they owed him nothing, because they bloomed not for his approval, but because that is what seeds do when they are given light and water and room enough to grow. Dogen, the great Zen master, once wrote that flowers fall even though we love them, and weeds grow even though we do not love them. This is not a tragedy. It is simply the truth, and there is a strange peace in accepting it. The peace of no longer arguing with reality. The peace of letting things be what they are. Thich Nhat Hanh once said that it is not impermanence that makes us suffer. It is wanting things to be permanent when they are not. And perhaps tonight, lying here in the darkness, you can feel the truth of that. The day you just lived through is gone. It will not come again. The conversations you had, the meals you ate, the light that moved across the floor of your room, all of it is over. And there is something tender in that, something worth noticing, not with sadness, but with the kind of attention you give to the last light before the sun goes down. The kind of attention that says, "I see this. I am here for this." And that is enough. You know this feeling already, even if you have never put it into words. The last day of a vacation. The last chapter of a book you did not want to end. The last time you held someone before a long goodbye. There is a sweetness in those moments that does not exist at the beginning. It only appears at the edge. The sweetness of knowing that this is it. This is the moment. And you are awake for it. Perhaps your body already knows what your mind is still learning. Perhaps your shoulders have softened without you deciding to soften them. Perhaps your jaw has released a tension you did not know it was holding. Perhaps your breath has found a rhythm that belongs only to this moment. Unrepeatable, unforced. This is impermanence working in your favor. The tension you carried into this bed does not have to stay. It is already changing. It is already becoming something lighter. You do not need to push it away. It is leaving on its own, the way clouds move across a night sky. Slowly, without effort, without asking permission, and what is left behind is not emptiness. It is space for rest, space for quiet, space for whatever your body needs to do, while your mind finally, gently lets go when you are ready. We will continue together. There is a small island in a warm sea, where the trees grow close together, and the air is thick with the sound of insects and bird song. On this island, there lived a woman who taught children. She was good at her work, patient, kind. The children loved her because she listened to them the way most adults do not, with her whole body, her whole attention, as if what they were saying was the most important thing she had ever heard. When a child spoke to her, she would kneel down so that their eyes were level, and she would wait. She would wait for the full sentence, for the pause at the end, for the small nod that meant they were finished, and only then would she respond. The children trusted her because of this. They could feel that she was really there. But at night, when the school was closed, and the children had gone home, and the island grew quiet, her mind did not rest. It moved ceaselessly from one thought to the next, like an animal pacing in a cage it had long outgrown. She would lie in her bed, and the ceiling above her would disappear, replaced by an endless gallery of worries. She would think about what she had said that day, whether it was the right thing, whether the boy in the back row, who had been so quiet, was struggling with something at home, whether she should have chosen a different story for the lesson, whether she was doing enough, whether she was enough. And then the thoughts would widen, the way ripples widen when you throw a stone into still water, from the boy in the back row to her own childhood, from her own childhood to her mother, from her mother to the conversation they had not had in months, from that conversation to money, from money to the future, from the future to a dread she could not name, but could always feel, sitting just beneath the surface of everything, the way cold water sits beneath the warm layer of a lake. If you swam deep enough, you found it, and the mind at night always swam deep enough. She had tried many things. She had tried counting her breaths, but her mind counted the breaths and thought at the same time, as if it had learned to multitask its own restlessness. She had tried reading before bed, but the words on the page would blur, and her mind would wander between the sentences, building elaborate anxieties in the spaces between paragraphs. She had tried exhausting herself with long walks along the shore in the evening, her feet in the warm sand, the waves pulling at her ankles. But her body would grow tired, and her mind would not. It would keep going, humming along like a machine that someone had forgotten to turn off. And eventually she stopped trying to fix it, and simply accepted that she was a person whose mind did not rest, that this was who she was. One morning, she met an old fisherman at the market. He was selling small silver fish laid out in rows on a bed of crushed ice. His hands were steady, brown-veined with blue. His eyes were calm, and there was something about him that she noticed. A stillness. Not the stillness of someone who is not thinking, but the stillness of someone who has made peace with the noise. The way a house beside a highway eventually stops hearing the traffic. Not because the traffic has stopped, but because something inside has changed its relationship to the sound. She did not know why she said it, but she told him. She said, "My mind will not be quiet. It has not been quiet in years." He looked at her and nodded slowly, as if this was the most natural thing anyone had ever told him. As if she had said, "The sky is blue today," or "The fish are fresh." "My mind is not quiet either." He said, "But you seem so peaceful." He wrapped a fish in paper and handed it to a customer. His movements were unhurried. "I am not peaceful because my mind is quiet. I am peaceful because I stopped arguing with it." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "When I go out on the water," he said, "the waves are always moving. Always, even on a calm day. There is movement, ripples and currents, and the slow pull of the tide. I used to wish for a flat sea, a sea like glass. I thought that was peace, the absence of waves. But a flat sea is a dead sea. The movement is what makes it alive. Your mind is the same. The thoughts are the waves. You do not need to stop them. You just need to stop believing that every wave is a storm." She stood there with the fish wrapped in paper in her hand, the ice melting slowly through the paper, the sun warm on her arms. "But some of the thoughts are terrible. They say terrible things." "Yes," he said. "Some waves are large. Some are dark. Some feel like they will pull you under. But have you noticed? They all pass. Every single one. The large ones and the small ones. The dark ones and the bright ones. Not one of them has ever stayed. Not one. You have been watching waves your whole life, and not a single one has stayed." She walked home slowly that morning. The fish dripped a little on her skirt. The sun moved through the palm leaves above her and cast patterns on the road that shifted with the breeze. Children ran past her, laughing their bare feet, slapping the warm dirt. She was thinking about waves, about how every wave she had ever feared had eventually reached the shore and dissolved into foam and been pulled back into the sea. Every single one. The anxious thought about the boy in the back row. It had come, and it had gone. The worry about money. It had crested, and it had passed. The fear about her mother. It had felt like a wall, and then one morning it was just a shadow. The thought did not fix anything, but it opened something, a small window, a crack of light in a room she had thought was permanently dark. And perhaps there is something in this for all of us. Something we forget every night when we lie down and the mind begins its nightly performance. We forget that we have survived every thought we have ever had. Every one, the terrible ones and the trivial ones, and the ones that felt like they would destroy us. Not one of them stayed. Not one of them kept its promise of permanence. They came like waves. They crashed like waves. And they receded like waves. And we are still here. Still breathing. Still lying in the dark. Still able to hear these words. That is not nothing. That is everything. What the old fisherman was describing, though he would never have used the term, is what the Buddhist tradition calls the monkey mind. Chitta kapi, the restless chattering, swinging from branch to branch quality of untrained awareness. The Buddha himself spoke of it. This mind that leaps from thought to thought the way a monkey leaps from tree to tree, never resting, never satisfied, always reaching for the next branch before it has fully landed on this one. But here is what is often missed about this teaching. The Buddha did not say the monkey mind is the enemy. He did not say you must cage it or tame it or beat it into submission. He said something far more radical. He said, watch it. That is all, just watch. The way you might watch monkeys playing in the treetops on a warm afternoon. You do not chase them. You do not shout at them to stop. You sit beneath the tree and you observe. And something remarkable happens. The monkeys grow quieter. Not because you forced them, but because attention itself has a calming quality. The way a child calms down, not when you yell at them to stop crying, but when you sit with them and say, I am here. I see you, tell me what you are feeling. An old Zen saying puts it simply, you cannot stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. This is not a technique. It is a relationship, a new way of being with your own mind. Instead of treating your thoughts as problems to be solved or enemies to be defeated, you begin to see them as weather. Sometimes sunny, sometimes stormy, but always passing, always changing, never permanent. There is a story from the old monasteries that has been told for hundreds of years. A young monk went to his teacher in great distress. He knelt on the wooden floor, and his robes were damp with sweat, and his voice shook. He said, Master, my mind is like a wild horse. It runs in every direction. I cannot control it. I have tried every practice, and nothing works. I am failing. The teacher was sitting beneath a plum tree in the courtyard, peeling a piece of fruit with a small knife. He did not look up. He did not adjust his posture. He simply said, Have you tried not controlling it? What do you mean? If I do not control it, it will run wild forever. It is already running wild. The teacher said calmly, turning the plum slowly in his fingers. Your efforts to control it are just one more horse. He held out a piece of the fruit, pale gold and glistening. Eat this. The young monk took the fruit and ate it. It was sweet and cool, and the juice ran down his chin, and he tasted every part of it because his mind, for just a moment, had nothing to argue about. Nothing to fix, nothing to chase. There was only the taste, only this, there, the teacher said. That is meditation. Not the stopping of thoughts, but the eating of a plum. Shunryu Suzuki once said that the mind is like a muddy river. If you try to stop the water, it fights you. If you try to clean it by stirring, it gets worse. The mud swirls, and the water becomes darker than before. But if you let it flow, just let it go where it goes, without interference, without judgment, eventually the mud settles on its own. And what remains is clear. Not because you did something extraordinary, but because you stopped doing. Consider how a pond settles after a rain. The storm arrives. The wind pushes the surface into small choppy waves. The runoff pours in carrying dirt and debris. And for a time the water is brown and agitated, and you cannot see the bottom. But no one tries to fix the pond. No one stirs it or drains it or pours clear water in to dilute the mud. The pond is left alone. And slowly at its own pace, the particles settle, the dirt sinks, the debris drifts to the edges. And by morning the water is clear again. You can see the stones on the bottom. You can see the reflected sky. Nothing was done. Everything was allowed. Your mind works the same way. The thoughts that troubled you at the beginning of this night are already settling. You can feel it. If you pay attention, a slight quieting, a slight deepening. Not because you solved anything, but because you stopped stirring. In a valley, where the evening fog rose like breath from the cool earth. There was a monastery known for its silence. Not a forced silence, not the silence of rules and discipline and pointed fingers, but the silence that comes when a group of people have lived together long enough to understand that words are not always necessary, that sometimes the truest communication happens in the spaces between what is said. The monks here communicated in glances and gestures, and the quiet rhythm of shared labor. They cooked together without speaking. They swept the long stone courtyard without speaking. They sat in the evening and watched the fog rise from the valley floor without speaking. And in that shared watching, there was a kind of conversation deeper than any they could have had with words. A middle-aged man arrived at this monastery one autumn. He was a merchant from a large city, a man who spent his days negotiating deals, persuading customers, calculating margins and risks. His mind was sharp and fast, and it never stopped. Even in sleep he dreamed of numbers. He had come to the monastery because his doctor had told him that if he did not slow down, his body would slow him down permanently. His heart was strained. His blood pressure was high. His jaw ached from clenching it in his sleep. He was assigned to work in the kitchen with an old monk who had been at the monastery for 30 years. The old monk moved slowly. His hands shook slightly when he lifted the heavy iron pots. His eyesight was not what it had been, and he wore small spectacles that slid down his nose. But he cooked with a precision and a calm that the merchant found almost maddening. Every carrot was cut to the same thickness. Every grain of rice was washed, as if it were the only grain in the world. On the first morning, the merchant washed the rice in 30 seconds. Efficient, thorough, by his standards. The old monk watched him and said nothing. On the second morning, the merchant washed the rice in 30 seconds again. The old monk watched him and said nothing again. On the third morning, the merchant washed the rice and looked at the old monk, expecting the silence. But this time the old monk said, softly, slower, "But it is clean already. The rice is clean, but you are not." The merchant stared at him. The kitchen was quiet, except for the sound of water dripping from the tap and the distant call of birds outside. The old monk took the bowl and began washing the rice himself. His hands moved through the water with a slowness that felt almost absurd. Each grain was touched. Each motion was complete before the next began. There was no hurry in his fingers, no impatience in his wrists. The water turned cloudy white, and he poured it out carefully, watching it go. Then he added fresh water and began again. And again and again, 5 times, 6 times. "You are washing your mind," the old monk said, without looking up. "Not the rice. Every time you slow your hands, your thoughts slow too. Not because you force them, but because the body teaches the mind what the mind cannot teach itself. This is the secret that no book will tell you. Slowness is not weakness. It is presence." The merchant stayed for 3 months. By the end, he washed rice the way the old monk did. Slowly, completely, with nothing else happening. And he discovered that in those moments, those simple, unhurried, unremarkable moments of rinsing grain in cold water, of feeling the smooth weight of the rice between his fingers, his mind was quiet. Not empty, not blank, but quiet the way a lake is quiet at dawn. Still holding everything beneath its surface. Still reflecting the sky above, but no longer churning. No longer fighting itself. The Buddha once said that peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. And there is an even older teaching that says, what you resist Persists what you accept transforms. The mind you are fighting is the same mind that can find peace. The river you are trying to dam is the same river that, left alone, will carry you gently toward rest. And perhaps this is what he meant, not that you must sit cross-legged on a mountain for 30 years and force your mind into perfect stillness, but that the quiet you are looking for is already here. It is already inside you. It is the space between your thoughts, the pause between your breaths, the half-second between hearing a sound and naming it, the stillness that exists beneath the noise, the way the bottom of the ocean is still even when the surface is wild with storms. Tonight, if you are lying here with a mind that will not stop, reviewing the day, replaying conversations, rehearsing what you will say tomorrow, making lists in the dark, solving problems that do not need solving, until morning, you are not broken. You are not failing at rest. You are simply human. Your mind is doing what minds do. It is running through the forest of your day, touching every branch, checking every shadow, making sure everything is accounted for. It is trying to protect you. It is trying to keep you safe. And in a way, it is succeeding. Because you are safe. You are here. You are lying down. And the day is over. And nothing more is required of you. And your mind, restless as it is not your enemy. It is a river, and rivers move. That is what rivers do. You do not need to dam the river. You do not need to make it stop. You only need to stop standing in the middle of it, trying to hold back the water with your hands. Step to the bank. Sit down on the cool grass. Watch the water pass. Let the leaves and the sticks and the thoughts go by without reaching for any of them. And notice how even now, something in you has already begun to settle. Not because you forced it, but because you gave it permission, because you said to your own mind, for perhaps the first time tonight, I am not going to fight you. I am just going to sit here with you, and we will be quiet together. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is another kind of pain that most of us carry. It is quieter than the others, less dramatic. It does not announce itself the way grief does, or anger, or fear. It does not arrive in a moment you can point to and say, that is when it started. It sits in the background, like a low hum you have heard for so long that you no longer notice it is there. And yet, it colors everything. It colors the way you speak to yourself when you make a mistake, the way you lie awake, replaying moments of embarrassment or failure, running them over and over, like a film on a loop, each viewing somehow worse than the last, the way you hold yourself to a standard that you would never, in 1,000 years, apply to someone you loved. It is the quiet, relentless habit of being your own harshest critic, and it is so common, so deeply woven into the fabric of daily life, that most of us assume it is normal, that it is simply what it means to have a mind. Have you ever noticed the difference between how you speak to a friend who is struggling and how you speak to yourself when you are struggling? To a friend, you might say, you are doing your best, this is hard. It makes sense that you feel this way. It is okay to not have all the answers right now. But to yourself, you say something else entirely. You say, you should be better. You should know by now. You should have figured this out already. What is wrong with you? The voice is so familiar that you mistake it for truth, for good judgment, for honesty. But it is not truth. It is a habit, a very old habit that was probably given to you before you were old enough to question it, before you had the words to say, wait, that is not fair. And it has been running in the background ever since, like a program you forgot to close, using energy you did not know you were spending. There was a woman who came to a monastery carrying the body of her dead child. She went from door to door in the village, asking if anyone had medicine that could bring him back. Her grief was so vast that no one could bear to look at it directly. They turned away. They shook their heads. They closed their doors. Finally, someone directed her to the Buddha. He was staying nearby, teaching in a grove of trees. She went to him and laid her child at his feet and said, "Please, you are wise. Bring him back." The Buddha looked at her with great tenderness. He did not tell her to stop grieving. He did not explain the nature of death. He said, "I can help you, but first you must bring me a mustard seed from a house that has never known loss." She went from house to house, and at every door she heard the same thing. "We too have buried a child. We too have lost a parent. We too have watched someone we love disappear from this world." She never found the mustard seed. There was no house untouched by loss. But she found something she had not expected. She found that her pain was not a sign of failure. It was a sign of being alive. Every heart she encountered had been broken in its own way, and in that recognition, in the simple, devastating understanding that suffering is not a personal defect, but a universal truth, something in her softened. Not the grief remained, vast and real and hers, but the shame of the grief, the loneliness of it, the feeling that she was the only one, that something was uniquely wrong with her for hurting this much, that fell away like old bark from a tree, and underneath was something tender and raw and alive. The Buddha spoke of a quality he called metta, loving kindness, a warmth that asks nothing in return. It is usually taught as something we extend outward. May you be happy. May you be peaceful. May you be free from suffering. And this is beautiful. But the teaching that often gets overlooked, the teaching that changes everything, is the part where the Buddha said to begin with yourself. May I be happy, may I be peaceful. May I be free from suffering, not as an afterthought, not as a warm-up exercise before the real practice of being kind to others, but as the foundation, the ground floor, because you cannot give away what you do not have. You cannot pour water from a dry well, no matter how much you want to, and you cannot offer genuine kindness to the world while whispering cruelty to yourself in the dark. Self-compassion is not self-indulgence. It is not making excuses for your mistakes, or lowering your standards, or deciding that effort no longer matters. It is simply treating yourself with the same gentleness you would offer to anyone you loved who was having a hard time. It is the recognition that you, too, are a human being, that you, too, are doing your best with what you have, that the voice in your head that says, "Not good enough," is not wisdom. It is fear, and fear, like all things, can be met with kindness rather than obedience. Thich Nhat Hanh once said that compassion is a verb. It is not a feeling you wait for. It is not a mood that arrives when conditions are right. It is something you do, a choice you make over and over again. And the simplest, most radical thing you can do is to notice when you are being harsh with yourself and to choose in that moment to say something different, not something false, not something you do not believe, but something true. Something like, "I am doing my best. This is hard, and that is okay." There was a potter who lived at the edge of a wide lake where the water was so still on calm mornings that it looked like a second sky had been laid flat upon the ground. She had been making pots since she was a girl, learning from her grandmother, who had, learned from her grandmother before her. 4 generations of hands, shaping the same red clay from the same hillside. Her workshop was open on one side to the weather, and in the mornings she could hear the water against the shore. A soft, repetitive sound that was almost like breathing. The clay she used was local, dug from a bank where the earth was rich and dark and full of minerals that gave it a warm, reddish tone when fired. It smelled of earth and iron, and something older than both. When it was wet, it felt alive between her fingers, responsive, willing, ready to become whatever her hands suggested. But the potter had a problem. She could not finish anything without finding fault with it. Every bowl she made, every cup, every plate, she could see the flaw. A slight wobble in the rim that no one else would notice. An uneven thickness in the wall, a glaze that did not settle the way she had imagined, pooling where she did not want it, thinning where she wanted more. And when she saw the flaw, something inside her would close. A door would shut, and behind that door, a voice would say, "Not good enough. Try again, do better. You should be better by now." She had thrown away more pots than she had kept. Her workshop was full of the remnants, shards of clay in a pile behind the kiln, half-finished forms, the ghosts of things she had abandoned, because they did not meet the standard she held in her mind. A standard that, if she was being honest with herself, on the rare occasions she allowed that honesty, nothing had ever met. Not once, not in 30 years of daily devoted work. One autumn afternoon, a woman came to her workshop. She was a traveling healer, one of those people who walked from village to village, offering herbs and poultices, and sometimes just conversation to those who needed it. She had kind eyes and hands that were stained green from the plants she worked with. She watched the potter work for a while, without speaking, sitting on a low wooden stool by the open wall, the lake behind her, catching the last warm light of the afternoon. "You throw beautiful pots," the healer said. The potter shrugged, without looking up from the wheel. "They are adequate. That one there," the healer pointed to a bowl, drying on the shelf beside 3 others. "It is quite lovely." The potter glanced at it. "The rim is uneven on the left side. You can see it if you look closely." The healer walked over and picked up the bowl. She turned it in her hands slowly, the way you might turn a seashell, looking at it from every angle. "You know what I see when I look at this? I see someone who cares deeply about her work, who pours herself into every piece, who has spent a lifetime learning her craft, and is still trying to learn more. And I see a bowl that would make anyone who ate from it feel nourished and cared for. But the rim," the healer set the bowl down gently on the shelf. "The rim is the proof that a human being made this. That is not a flaw. That is a signature. It is the most beautiful thing about it." The potter said nothing. But something moved in her chest. Something shifted the way a tight knot shifts when you find the right thread to pull. Not undone, but loosened. Enough to breathe a little deeper. "Let me ask you something," the healer said. "When a child brings you a drawing, a messy, lopsided crayon-colored drawing of a house with the chimney crooked and the sun too big and the grass purple, what do you see?" "I see the effort, I see the joy, I see the child." "Do you tell the child the lines are crooked?" "Of course not." "Why not?" The potter paused. Her hands were still. The wheel was still. The lake was still. "Because the drawing is not about the lines. It is about the love that made it." The healer smiled, and it was the kind of smile that is not just an expression, but a kind of light. "Now tell me, why are your pots any different?" Pema Chödrön once wrote that the most fundamental aggression to ourselves, the most fundamental harm we can do to ourselves, is to remain ignorant by not having the courage and the respect to look at ourselves honestly and gently. Honestly and gently, both at the same time. This is the practice. Not honesty without gentleness, which is cruelty. Not gentleness without honesty, which is avoidance. But both together. Looking at yourself clearly and choosing kindness anyway. Not because you are perfect, but because you are here. Because you showed up, because you kept going, even when the voice said, stop. Even when the voice said, not enough. Even when the voice said, who do you think you are? The potter worked for many years after the healer's visit, and slowly, very slowly, the way a river changes the shape of a stone, not in a day, not in a year, but over the patient accumulation of countless small moments, she began to let her pots be what they were: imperfect, uneven, alive. She stopped throwing away the ones with crooked rims or uneven glazes. She began to see them differently, not as failures, but as evidence. Evidence that she had shown up that morning, that she had put her hands in the cold clay and tried, that she had cared enough to make something, even when she was afraid it would not be good enough. And the strangest thing happened. The pots she stopped trying to perfect were the ones people loved the most. They came from neighboring towns to buy them. They said the bowls had something, a warmth, a presence, the feeling of having been made by someone who was not performing perfection, but practicing acceptance. Someone who had stopped fighting with herself long enough to let the clay speak, to let the bowl be a bowl in a different part of the world, in a city where the buildings were old and the streets were narrow and cobbled, and the rain came often enough that people carried umbrellas the way other people carry keys. There lived a doctor who cared for elderly patients. Her office was on the second floor of a building that had once been a bakery, and on humid days you could still catch the faintest ghost of bread in the walls. The staircase was narrow and creaked in the same places every time, and her patients knew each creak by heart. She kept flowers on her desk, always fresh, always simple daisies mostly, sometimes wildflowers she picked on her morning walk along the canal. She was in her 50s now, and she had been a doctor for over 25 years. She was not the kind of doctor who rushed through appointments. She sat with her patients. She held their hands when they were afraid. She remembered the names of their grandchildren and asked about them. She was the kind of doctor people trusted not because of her credentials, but because of her presence. But she had not always been this way. When she was young, she had been driven by a ferocious perfectionism. Every test score, every evaluation, every patient outcome. She measured herself against an impossible standard, and when she fell short, which she sometimes did because she was human, the punishment was swift and internal and brutal. She would lie awake, cataloging her mistakes. She would replay difficult cases in her mind, searching for the moment she should have known better, should have acted faster, should have been more. It was a patient who changed her, an old woman 91 years old, with hands like paper and eyes that still held light. The old woman was dying. There was nothing more the doctor could do, and one afternoon, sitting beside the old woman's bed, the doctor began to cry. She did not mean to. The tears came before she could stop them. The old woman reached out and took the doctor's hand. Her grip was surprisingly firm. "You are a good doctor," the old woman said. "I should have caught it sooner. Perhaps, but you are here now. And you are here not because you are perfect. You are here because you care, and caring is worth more than perfection. Perfection is cold. Caring is warm. I would rather be held by warm hands than perfect hands. The doctor looked at their two hands together. One smooth, one wrinkled, one strong, one fragile. Both human, both imperfect, both enough. She carried those words with her for the rest of her career, not as a philosophy she recited, but as a feeling she returned to whenever the old voice began again. The voice that said, not good enough, try harder, be more. She would feel the old woman's hand in hers. She would hear the words, and the voice would grow quieter. Not silent, but quieter. Enough to breathe. Enough to continue. Enough to be the kind of doctor who sits with her patients and holds their hands and does not pretend to be anything other than what she is, a human being trying her best in a world that does not come with instructions. Perhaps tonight, as you lie here, you can offer yourself the same kindness. Not because you have earned it. Not because you did everything right today. Not because you met every standard and checked every box. But because kindness does not need a reason. It is not a reward for good behavior. It is a rain. It falls on everything equally. The perfect and the imperfect. The finished and the unfinished. The things you are proud of and the things you wish you could do. Over. And if you notice, right now, a softness in your body, a loosening in your chest, a warmth behind your eyes, a heaviness in your hands, that is not fatigue, but surrender. That is not weakness. That is your heart, remembering what it already knows. That you are enough, not perfect, not finished, but enough exactly as you are. In this breath, in this moment. In this darkness that is not empty, but full of rest. The Buddha once said that you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Let those words rest on you tonight, the way a blanket rests on a sleeping child, gently, fully, without any need to hold it in place. It stays because it was placed there with care, and you do not need to do anything more tonight than receive it. When you are ready, we will continue together. The night deepens now, and there is a teaching the Buddha offered that might be the most practical thing he ever said. It does not require meditation or renunciation or any special belief. It asks only that you notice how you live. The Buddha called it the middle way, Majjhima Patipada. The path that walks between extremes, not too tight, not too loose, not too much effort, not too little, not indulgence, not deprivation. The place where the string of a musical instrument is tuned just right, tight enough to produce a clear sound, loose enough not to snap. The Buddha came to this understanding through his own life. Before he became the Buddha, he was a prince who had everything, every luxury, every comfort, every pleasure the world could offer. And it did not bring him peace. So he left the palace and became an ascetic. He starved himself. He slept on rocks. He denied his body until his ribs showed through his skin, and his spine could be felt through his stomach. And that did not bring him peace either. After 6 years of extremes, 6 years of swinging between too much and too little, he sat down beneath a tree and asked a simpler question. What if the answer is not at either end? What if the answer is in the middle? This seems obvious when you hear it. Of course the answer is balance. Of course extremes do not work. But think about how often we live in extremes without realizing it. We work until we burn out, and then we collapse. We diet with fierce discipline, and then we binge. We commit ourselves completely to someone, and then withdraw completely When we are hurt, we set impossible standards, and when we fail to meet them, we abandon the standards entirely. The pendulum swings, and we swing with it, exhausted, never landing in the place where rest is possible. The middle way is not a compromise. It is not the lukewarm middle ground between passion and apathy. It is something more alive than that. It is the place where you care deeply without being destroyed by your caring, where you try without being crushed by your trying, where you love without losing yourself in your loving. It is the narrow, beautiful path between gripping and giving up. An old teacher once compared it to walking on a mountain ridge. On one side, a steep drop into indulgence, doing whatever feels good in the moment, without regard for consequence. On the other side, a steep drop into rigidity, forcing yourself into a shape that does not fit, denying yourself anything that might be called joy. The ridge between them is narrow, but it is the only path that leads forward. And the view from that ridge is extraordinary. In a city where the buildings were packed close together and the rooftops were visible from the hills above, there lived a young man who baked bread. He had learned the craft from his uncle, who ran a small bakery on a corner street where the morning light came in through a high window and lit up the flour that hung in the air like tiny constellations. The smell of the bakery was a thing unto itself, warm and yeasty and slightly sweet, the kind of smell that makes you feel safe before you can explain why. The young man loved this smell. He arrived before dawn each day and mixed the dough by hand, feeling the texture change beneath his palms. From sticky and rough to smooth and elastic, he shaped the loaves with care, each one placed on the tray with the precision of someone arranging flowers. But the young man had a habit that was slowly wearing him down. He could not stop. He could not rest until every loaf was perfect. If a crust cracked in the wrong place, he would start again. If the color was a shade too dark, he would adjust the oven and wait another hour. He worked 16 hours a day, sometimes more. And when he went home at night, he was so tired that he could not eat the bread he had made. His hands shook, his back ached. His uncle had told him to slow down, but the young man could not hear it. He believed that excellence required suffering, that if something was easy, it was not worth doing. That rest was a luxury he could not afford. One morning, a woman came into the bakery. She was a musician, a cellist, who lived above the hardware store across the street. She had come for bread, but she stayed because she noticed something. "Your bread is beautiful," she said, "but you look terrible." He wiped his hands on his apron and tried to smile. "I did not sleep well." "You never sleep well," she said. She had seen his light on at 3 in the morning, night after night, from her window. He shrugged. "The bread will not make itself." She set her cello case down by the counter. "Can I show you something?" She opened the case and took out the instrument. It was old and dark, and the wood gleamed where her hands had touched it 1,000 times. She tightened the bow and drew it across the strings. The sound that came out was thin, pinched, strained. She was pressing too hard. "That is what too much effort sounds like," she said. Then she loosened the bow until it barely touched the strings. The sound was breathy, vague, without shape. A whisper that said nothing. That is what too little effort sounds like. Then she found the place in between. The bow rested on the strings with just enough weight, not pressing, not floating. Just there, and the sound that came out filled the entire bakery. It was rich and deep and warm, and it seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. The loaves on the shelves seemed to listen. "That," she said, is the middle. He stood there covered in flour, his eyes slightly wet, and he heard it. Not just the music, but the teaching inside the music that there is a place between pushing and giving up where the best things happen, where the bread rises not because you forced it, but because you gave it the right conditions. Warmth, time, air, and then step back, where the music sounds not because you pressed the bow with all your strength, but because you found the weight that lets the strings sing. He began to change after that. Not all at once. A change that happens all at once rarely lasts. But slowly, the way a river changes the shape of its bank, one grain of sand at a time, one gentle current at a time. He started leaving the bakery at a reasonable hour. He stopped restarting loaves that cracked in the wrong place. He began to eat his own bread, sitting at the small table by the window with a cup of tea, tasting what he had made. And the bread did not suffer. In fact, it improved because there was something in the dough that responded to the shift in him, a lightness, a warmth, an ease that had not been there when his hands were tense and his jaw was clenched and his mind was a list of things that needed to be better. The Buddha once said that the middle way gives rise to vision, gives rise to knowledge, and leads to peace. Not the peace of doing nothing, but the peace of doing what is needed, no more, no less, and trusting the process to do the rest. The peace of the string, tuned to the right tension. The piece of the bread left to rise in its own time. There is a parable that the teachers in the old monasteries used to tell. A student asked his master, "How do I find balance?" The master said, "Hold out your hand." The student held out his hand, palm up. The master placed a stone in it. "Now close your fist tight," he said. The student squeezed. His knuckles whitened. His forearm shook. "Is this comfortable?" "No." "Now open your hand completely and let the stone fall." The student opened his hand. The stone tumbled to the floor. "Is this useful?" "No." "The stone is gone." "Now hold the stone with an open palm." Not gripping, not dropping, just holding. The student balanced the stone on his open palm. It sat there still and warm from his hand. That, the master said, is the middle way. You keep what matters, but your hand does not ache. In a rural village where the roads were unpaved and wound through green hills, and the nearest city was half a day's travel by cart, there was a woman who raised goats. She was not young. She had been raising goats since her children were small, and her children were now grown and living in the city. She lived alone with the animals on a hillside where the grass grew tall in summer and the wind blew cold in winter. Her days were simple. She woke with the sun, milked the goats, repaired the fences, made cheese, walked the hills, and went to bed when the sky grew dark. She did not own a clock. She did not need one. The goats told her what time it was by the angle of their ears and the tone of their calls. People in the village said she was the most peaceful person they knew. And they were right, but she had not always been peaceful. She had been in her younger years, exactly like the young baker, driven, relentless, convinced that effort was the only measure of value. She had raised her children with this belief. She had worked 2 jobs while they were growing up. She had saved every coin and spent nothing on herself, and by the time her children left for the city, she was exhausted in a way that sleep could not fix. One day, sitting on the hillside watching her goats graze, she noticed something. The goats did not rush. They moved from one patch of grass to the next at their own pace. When a patch was finished, they moved on. They did not worry about whether the next patch would be as good. They did not grieve the patch they had just left. They simply walked to the next one and began again. And when they were full, they stopped. They lay down in the shade and rested. Not because they had earned it, but because their bodies said, "Enough." She sat on that hillside for a long time that afternoon. The wind moved through the tall grass. The goats lay around her like warm stones. And she thought, "I have never done that. I have never let my body say enough. I have never walked away from a task because I was full, only because the task was done, or because I had collapsed." And something shifted in her. Not dramatically, not in a single moment of enlightenment, but slowly the way the season changes, 1 degree at a time, until one morning you look out the window and the world is different. Dogen once wrote that to study the self is to forget the self, and to forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. Perhaps what the goat woman discovered was a version of this, that when she stopped driving herself, when she forgot the self that insisted on constant effort, the world itself became her teacher. The goats, the grass, the wind, the rhythm of the days. They all pointed toward the same truth. That life is not a problem to be solved through relentless effort. It is a song to be played with the right amount of pressure on the strings. Not too much, not too little. Just enough, and perhaps tonight you can feel this teaching in your own body. The day behind you was full. It was full of effort and decisions, and the 1,000 small exertions that make up a life. And now it is over. And the question the middle way asks is simple. Can you let it be over? Can you stop carrying the day into the night? Can you find the place between doing and collapsing where true rest lives? The place where your body says enough, and you believe it. If your jaw is clenched right now, you do not need to force it open. Just notice it. The noticing itself is a kind of loosening. If your hands are curled, you do not need to flatten them. Just feel them. Feel the weight of each finger against whatever they are resting on. This is the middle way of rest. Not forcing relaxation, not ignoring tension, just noticing, just being with what is, without trying to change it or fix it or improve it, and letting the body do what it already knows how to do. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is a thread that runs through many of these teachings tonight, and it is easy to miss because it is so simple. We have spoken of letting go, of impermanence, of the restless mind, of compassion, of balance. But beneath all of these, like the earth beneath a garden, there is something else, something older and quieter. It is gratitude, not the showy kind, not the kind you perform for others, but the deep, private, almost wordless kind that happens when you stop long enough to notice what is already here. In a village, at the foot of a mountain, where the mist gathered each morning, like a congregation of ghosts, and then dispersed slowly as the sun warmed. The valley there lived an old woman who washed clothes in the river. She had done this for most of her life, kneeling on the flat stones at the water's edge, wringing the fabric in her brown hands, spreading the shirts and sheets and children's trousers on the rocks to dry in the afternoon sun. The river was cold and clear, and it came from somewhere high in the mountains where no one had been. She could hear it before she saw it each morning, the sound moving through the trees, like a voice calling her to prayer. Her knees ached some mornings, especially in winter, when the stones were cold enough to feel through the thick cotton of her skirts. Her fingers were stiff, and her knuckles swollen from years of wringing wet cloth. The work was repetitive and unglamorous, and no one ever thanked her for it. She washed clothes for the village because that was what she did. It was as simple and unquestioned as the river itself. But there was something about the way she worked that drew attention. Travelers who passed through the village sometimes stopped on the bridge above and watched her, not because the work was remarkable, but because she was. She hummed while she worked, old songs with no words, melodies that seemed to come from the same place as the river. She spoke to the water as if it were a friend. She held each piece of clothing the way you might hold a letter from someone you missed, with attention, with care, as if the fabric itself mattered, as if the shirt she was washing belonged to someone she loved. And in a way it did. Every shirt and every sheet and every pair of small trousers belonged to a neighbor, to a friend, to a child she had watched grow up in this village where everyone knew everyone, and the sound of the river was the sound of home. A young traveler once asked her, "How can you be happy doing this work? It is the same thing every day. The same river, the same stones, the same motions." The old woman looked at him and smiled. Her smile was slow and wide, and it crinkled the skin around her eyes into a pattern that looked like the rings of a very old tree. "Every day I have water," she said, "clean water that comes from the mountain and runs cold over my hands. Every day I have hands that can feel it. Every day I have the sun on my back and the sound of the birds in the fig tree and the smell of the wind when it comes across the field. Every day I have this river and these stones and the work that keeps my body moving and my mind quiet. What more is there to want?" The traveler did not understand at first. He was young and restless, and he believed that happiness was somewhere ahead of him. In the next city, in the next achievement, in the next version of himself that would finally be worthy of contentment. But the old woman's words stayed with him, the way a stone stays in your shoe. He could not get comfortable with them. He could not get rid of them. And years later, when his life had taken him to many cities and many achievements, and he had discovered that none of them contained the thing he was looking for, he remembered the woman at the river. And he understood she had not been settling for less. She had been seeing more. What she had was not ignorance. It was not the absence of ambition or curiosity or desire. It was something else. She had the ability to see what was in front of her, to feel the water on her hands and know that the water was enough, to hear the birds and know that the sound was enough, to be where she was, fully and completely, without wishing to be somewhere else. And this ability, this simple, radical, world-changing ability, is what the Buddhist tradition calls gratitude. Not as a practice you do once a day, not as a list you write in a journal before bed, but as a way of seeing, a lens through which everything becomes more vivid, more precious, more real. The Buddha once said that enough is a feast. Think about that for a moment. Not that more is better. Not that the goal is abundance, but that enough, just enough, is already a feast. The breath you are breathing right now is enough. The pillow beneath your head is enough. The darkness around you, the quiet, the sound of these words, it is all enough. And when you can feel that, not just think it, but feel it in your body, something releases. The endless wanting softens. The measuring and comparing and reaching for more, it grows quiet, and in its place is a warmth that does not need a reason. A contentment that does not depend on getting what you want. It depends only on noticing what you already have. There is a Zen story about a master who was asked by his student, "What is the most valuable thing in the world?" The master said, "The head of a dead cat." The student was shocked. How can that be the most valuable thing? The master said, because no one can name its price. The teaching is strange, deliberately strange, because it is trying to shake something loose. The most valuable things are the ones we cannot put a price on. The ones we do not think to be grateful for, because they are always there. Your heartbeat, the ability to taste food, the fact that someone, somewhere in your life, once looked at you with kindness. These things have no price. And because they have no price, they are priceless. Meister Eckhart, a Christian mystic, whose words echo Buddhist insight, once said that if the only prayer you ever say in your entire life is thank you, that will be enough. And perhaps that is the simplest teaching of all. Not a meditation technique, not a philosophical framework, just thank you for this breath, for this night, for the simple fact of being alive to hear these words. In a harbor town, where the boats came in each evening, loaded with the day's catch, and the gulls circled above the masts calling to each other in voices that sounded like laughter and complaint mixed together there, lived a man who repaired roofs. He was good at his work, but not exceptional, not the kind of craftsman people talked about with reverence. He was solid, reliable. He showed up when he said he would, which in this town was rarer than talent. His truck was old and dented, and full of tools that he knew by feel. His hands were large and calloused and always slightly dirty, even after he washed them, because the years of tar and sealant and copper flashing had worked their way into the creases of his skin and would not leave. But people called him, because when he worked on their roof, he treated the house as if it were his own. He moved carefully. He cleaned up after himself, and when he was finished, he always stood back and looked at the roof from the street, the way you might look at a painting you had just hung to make sure it was right. He had lost his wife 5 years ago. She had died suddenly, between one breath and the next, while sitting in her chair, reading a book. When he came home that evening and found her, the book was still open on her lap, and the light from the window was falling across her face. And for a moment, just a moment, before the understanding arrived, she looked like she was sleeping. After her death, he had expected the world to stop. It did not. The sun came up the next morning. The neighbors went to work. The boats came in. The roofs still leaked. And he kept repairing them, not because he wanted to, but because there was nothing else to do. And slowly, over months that felt like years, something strange happened. He began to notice things he had never noticed before. The way the morning light moved across the kitchen floor in a slow arc that took exactly 20 minutes to reach the wall. The sound of rain on the roof he had just repaired. A sound he had heard 1,000 times, but never really listened to. The taste of the simple meals he cooked for himself, rice and vegetables, and sometimes a piece of fish from the market. He began to say thank you, not to anyone in particular, not to God or the universe or any concept, just thank you. To the morning, to the rice in the pot, to the rain, to the creak of the stairs that reminded him he was in a house that was his, that was warm, that was still standing. He said it the way you might say good morning to a neighbor, casually, naturally, without ceremony. And he discovered that gratitude, when it becomes a habit, is not a feeling. It is a form of attention. It is the practice of looking at what is in front of you and seeing it clearly, without the film of wanting something else, something better, something more. His wife would have loved that. She had always been the one who noticed things. The first crocus in spring, the way the cat slept with one paw over its nose, the particular shade of blue The sky turned just after sunset. She had tried to teach him to see these things, and he had been too busy, too distracted, too certain that the important things were somewhere else. And now, years after she was gone, he was finally learning what she had been trying to show him. That the important things are not somewhere else. They are here. They have always been here. And the only thing missing was his attention. Thich Nhat Hanh once said that the present moment is the only moment available to us, and it is the door to all moments. This is the teaching of gratitude, not that the past does not matter, not that the future is unimportant, but that the only place you can actually be grateful is here, in this moment, in this breath, because this is the only moment that exists. Everything else is memory or imagination. And while memory and imagination have their uses, they cannot hold a cup of tea. They cannot feel the weight of a blanket. They cannot taste bread or hear birds or feel the slow, heavy warmth of a body letting go of the day. Only this moment can do that. Only now, perhaps, as you lie here, you can notice one thing you are grateful for. Just one. It does not need to be large. It can be the softness of the pillow, the fact that you are warm, the sound of your own breathing, steady and unhurried, proof that you are alive and that your body is taking care of itself without being asked. If you can find one thing, just one, and let yourself feel it fully, that is enough. That is the whole practice. Not a list, not a performance. Just one moment of seeing clearly what is already yours. When you are ready, we will continue together. The night has grown very still now, and there is one more thread I would like to follow before we begin to close. It is perhaps the simplest teaching of all and the hardest to receive, because it asks you to do the one thing that the modern world has trained you to resist. It asks you to be still. Have you ever stood in a forest so deep and so quiet that you could hear the silence? Not the absence of sound, but the presence of silence, the positive, active, almost physical quality of a space where nothing is being said. It is not emptiness. It is fullness. A fullness that does not need to be filled with anything else. In an old monastery on the edge of a pine forest, where the trees were so tall and straight that walking among them felt like walking through the columns of a vast, roofless cathedral, there was a room. It was small and bare. The floor was stone, worn smooth by centuries of feet. The walls were white, the kind of white that is not painted but washed, scrubbed clean, year after year, until the plaster itself has become a shade of light. There was one window, high on the eastern wall, that let in the morning light, in a single bright shaft that moved across the floor as the hours passed, like the hand of a slow clock. There was nothing else in the room, no cushion, no altar, no candle, no decoration, just the room itself, and the light, and the stone, and the smell of pine coming through the window on quiet mornings. The monks called it the listening room. A traveler once asked the abbot, a thin old man with a shaved head and eyes that seemed to contain their own kind of light, "Why do you call it the listening room? What are you listening for?" The abbot smiled. It was the kind of smile that suggests the question is the answer. Nothing in particular. Then why listen? Because when you stop talking, when you stop thinking, when you stop planning and solving and reaching for the next thing and the next thing and the next, you can hear what has been here all along. The sound of your own life. The sound of being alive. Not the content of your life, not the job, not the worries, not the relationships, not the achievements or the failures, but the fact of it. The sheer unlikely, unreasonable fact that you are here at all. Breathing, feeling, aware, and that sound, once you hear it, is the most restful thing in the world. The traveler did not understand. He went into the room, anyway, because the door was open, and curiosity is a kind of courage. He sat on the stone floor. The stone was cold, the air was cool and still, and it smelled faintly of pine from the forest outside. He sat there for a long time. At first his mind raced. It listed errands. It composed emails. It argued with people who were not there. But after a while, he did not know how long, because there was no clock, and the light barely moved. The racing slowed. The lists dissolved. The arguments faded. And something else emerged. A sound, not a sound exactly, more like a feeling that had a quality of sound to it. The sound of his own presence. The fact of being here, in this body, in this room, at this moment alive. He wept. He did not know why. Perhaps because he realized that he had been alive for 43 years and had never really stopped to feel it. The Buddha once said that in silence and stillness, the world surrenders its secrets, not the secrets of the universe, not the answers to philosophical questions, but the secret that most of us miss because we are too busy to receive it, that this moment, exactly as it is already complete. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be removed. You are not waiting for peace to arrive. Peace is what is here when you stop doing everything else. Zen Master Dogen wrote that to study the way is to study the self, and to study the self is to forget the self. And perhaps silence is how we forget the self, not by forcing it away, but by letting it grow so quiet that it becomes transparent. You see through it the way you see through clear water to the stones below. The self does not disappear, but it becomes lighter, more porous, more willing to let the world pass through it without interference. There was a musician, a flute player, who lived alone in a cottage beside a river. The cottage was small, made of stone with a roof that leaked a little in heavy rain, and a door that did not close properly when the wood swelled in summer. But she loved it. She loved the river that ran past her bedroom window, close enough that she could hear it at night. She loved the garden that had gone half wild, with rosemary and mint, and a climbing rose that covered the western wall, with small pink flowers in June. She loved the kitchen, where the light came in low in the mornings and turned the wooden table gold. She had spent her life performing. Concert halls with velvet seats and crystal chandeliers, recording studios where the walls were padded, and the silence between takes felt artificial, held in place by technology, rather than earned by attention. Festivals in parks where thousands listened, while the sun went down and the stars came out one by one. She was accomplished, decorated. Her name appeared in programs and reviews, and on the spines of albums in music stores. She was admired, and she was tired. Not of the music. She loved the music. She would always love the music. But of the performing, of the constant production, of sound, of filling silence with notes, filling rooms with melody, filling the expectations of audiences who wanted more, always louder, always faster, always more complex, more dazzling, more impressive. She had spent 40 years pouring sound into the world, and now she wanted to hear what the world sounded like without her. She moved to the cottage to rest, and for the first 3 months, she did not play. She did not even open the case. She woke to the sound of the river. She cooked simple meals, eggs, toast soup, made from whatever was in the garden. She walked through the fields in the evening, when the light was amber, and the insects sang in the tall grass with a persistence that she found both annoying and admirable. She sat in the garden and watched the bees move from flower to flower with an efficiency and a grace that made her think of the best orchestras she had played in. She did nothing that produced anything. No performances, no recordings, no practice. Nothing, and in that nothing, she found something. She found that the silence was not empty. It was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of sounds she had never heard, because she had always been making sound herself. The river had a melody. The wind through the reeds had a rhythm. The rain on the roof played in a time signature she had never encountered in any concert hall. The birds improvised with an abandon and a joy that no human musician could match. One evening she picked up her flute. She did not play a composed piece. She played one note, a single long sustained note, and she held it until her breath ran out. And in the silence that followed, she heard the note continue. In the room, in the walls, in the air, in the river, outside. The note did not end when she stopped blowing. It merged with everything else. It became part of the silence. She understood then what silence had been trying to teach her. That music does not come from the musician. It comes from the silence. The silence is the source. The notes are just the silence making itself visible. The way waves are just the ocean making itself visible. The way stars are just the darkness making itself visible. Without silence, there is no music. Without stillness, there is no movement. Without rest, there is no life. An ancient teaching says that between the notes, the silence speaks. And perhaps that is the most important thing you can hear tonight. Not the words, not the stories, not the teachings, but the silence between them. The pause between breaths, the space between thoughts. That space is not a gap. It is the ground. It is the foundation on which everything rests. And you can rest there too. Rumi, the great Sufi poet, whose words echo across all spiritual traditions, once silence is the language of God, and all else is poor translation. You do not need to believe in God to feel the truth of this. You only need to notice that when everything stops, when the mind stops, when the body stops, when the wanting and the worrying and the doing all stop, what remains is not nothing. What remains is the most yourself you have ever been, the most alive, the most present, the most real. Perhaps tonight you can let the silence hold you the way water holds a boat. Not through effort, not through force, but through the simple fact of being there. The silence is always here. It has been here since before you were born, and it will be here long after. And it is not waiting for you to be worthy of it, or ready for it, or quiet enough for it. It is simply here, and you are in it, and that is enough. If your eyes are heavy, let them close. You do not need to keep listening with effort. Let the words wash over you, the way waves wash over stones on a beach. You do not need to catch everyone. You do not need to understand everyone. The ones that are meant for you will find you. The rest will pass. And in the spaces between, in the silence between the words, in the stillness between the breaths, there is rest, deep rest, the kind of rest that does not require you to do anything at all. When you are ready, we will continue together. And so, we have come to the quietest part of the evening, the part where the stories begin to slow, where the words grow fewer, where the spaces between them widen like the spaces between stars in a clear sky. We have traveled together through so much tonight. We have sat with a gardener who watched her garden disappear. and learned that the hands that built it were enough. We have stood beside a net mender on a cold shore, watching the sea take everything and return everything in its own time. We have followed a school teacher on a small island who could not quiet his mind, and a merchant who learned to wash rice slowly, and a potter who could not finish a single piece without finding fault, and a baker who burned her bread trying to make it perfect, and an old woman who washed clothes in a river every morning and said, "Thank you to the water." We have listened with a traveler in a stone room where the silence was not empty, and we have heard a flute player discover that the most beautiful sound is the one that comes after the note ends. These are not famous people. They are not saints or masters or enlightened beings. They are ordinary. They are us. They are the person sitting next to you on the bus, and the person ahead of you in line at the market, and the person you pass on the street without noticing. And the teachings they carry are not things they studied or memorized or earned through years of meditation on a mountaintop. They are things they stumbled into, the way you stumble into a clearing in the woods, by walking long enough and paying attention, by not giving up, by allowing the path to take them somewhere they did not plan to go. And perhaps that is the most honest thing that can be said about the Dharma. It is not somewhere else. It is not locked behind a gate that only the devoted can open. It is not something you need to go looking for. It is already here, folded into the ordinary moments of an ordinary life, waiting for you to notice. Tonight we have touched on many things, but if you remember nothing else, and remembering is not the point, two teachings seem to return again and again, like a river returning to the sea no matter how far it wanders. The first is letting go, not the dramatic kind, not the kind where you stand on a cliff and release a balloon and feel transformed, but the quiet kind, the kind that happens when you notice your hands are gripping something, a thought, a worry, a wish for things to be different, and you simply open them. Not because you have decided to be brave or spiritual or free, but because your fingers are tired, because holding on takes more effort than you realized, and letting go is not a decision but a softening. The way snow melts, not because it decides to melt, but because the sun is warm and the snow is ready. The way a leaf lets go of a branch in October. There is no moment of release. There is only the moment when the leaf is on the branch and the moment when it is in the air. And between those two moments is something so gentle and so natural that it does not deserve the word surrender. It is simply what happens when holding on is no longer necessary. You have been holding things today. Everyone holds things. Worries about tomorrow. Regrets about yesterday, plans that did not work out, conversations you wish you had handled differently, the small persistent ache of wanting things to be other than they are. And all of it is understandable. All of it is human, but none of it belongs in your hands right now. Right now your only work is to rest. And rest begins when the hands open. Imagine, if you like, that everything you have been carrying today, every concern, every plan, every unfinished thought, is a handful of sand. And imagine that your hands, slowly, without effort, without ceremony, simply turn over. The sand falls, it does not disappear. It is still there, on the ground, and you can pick it up again tomorrow, if you want. But for now, the hands are empty. And empty hands are light. And light hands can rest. And rest is what the night is for. The second teaching is impermanence. And perhaps tonight, after all these stories, the word sounds less like a philosophical concept and more like what it actually is. a description of the way things move, the way the light changes, the way the seasons turn, the way a conversation shifts, the way a feeling arrives, intense and certain and seemingly permanent, and then without anyone doing anything, passes like weather, like a wave, like the sound of a bell that rings and rings, and then gradually becomes silence. Impermanence is not something to be afraid of. It is the reason anything is precious at all. The cherry blossom is beautiful because it falls. The sunset is beautiful because it fades. This moment, this particular arrangement of breath and warmth and quiet, and the sound of these words in the dark, is beautiful because it will not come again, not exactly like this, not with this same light, this same weight in your limbs, this same slow rhythm of breathing that belongs to no one but you, right now in this place. And knowing that does not make it sad. It makes it real. It makes it worth your full attention, which tonight means your full rest. Everything that troubled you today was impermanent. Everything that delighted you was impermanent. The argument that felt so important this afternoon has already begun to dissolve. The joy you felt at something small and unexpected, a kind word, a good meal, a moment of unexpected beauty, that too has passed, but it left something behind. A warmth, a residue, the way a stone holds the heat of the sun long after the sun has gone down. And this night too is impermanent. It will pass into morning, and morning will bring its own concerns and its own light. But that is tomorrow, and tomorrow is not here yet. What is here is this: the warmth of the bed, the rhythm of your breath, the slow, quiet downward drift of a body that has done enough for one day and is ready to stop. And now one last story, the slowest one, the quietest one, the one that does not try to teach anything at all. There was a woman who lived alone in a small town at the foot of a mountain. The town was the kind that barely appeared on maps. A handful of houses along a single road, a post office that doubled as a general store, a church with a bell that rang on Sunday mornings and could be heard all the way up the valley, and a cafe that served coffee and soup and bread and not much else. The mountain behind the town was large and quiet and green, with pine trees that turned almost black in winter and pale silver green in spring when the new needles came in. The woman's name does not matter. What matters is the way she lived. She was not young and she was not old. She was somewhere in between, in that stretch of life where the future has stopped being a promise and has become, instead, simply the next day. She had a small house with a garden. The garden was not beautiful in any designed or intentional way. It was the kind of garden that happens when someone plants things over many years without a plan. Tomatoes next to roses, herbs growing between the stepping stones, a fig tree in the corner that produced small sweet figs in late summer that she ate standing up. Still warm from the sun, she woke early, not because she set an alarm, but because her body had learned the rhythms of the light. And when the first grey glow appeared at the edge of the curtains, something in her stirred, and she rose. She made tea, not any special kind, just tea. She stood at the kitchen window while the kettle heated and watched the mountain emerge from the darkness, first as a shape, then as a color, then as a presence with weight and texture and detail. The individual trees, the rocky outcrop near the summit, the path she sometimes walked on weekends that wound through the forest and came out at a small lake where the water was so still and so clear that you could see the stones at the bottom, each one distinct, each one exactly where it had always been. She drank her tea slowly. She did not check her phone. She did not make lists. She drank her tea and felt the warmth of the cup in her hands, and noticed the way the steam rose and curled and disappeared into the cool morning air, the way it twisted into shapes that lasted less than a second and were never repeated. Sometimes she watched the birds in the garden, the small brown ones that came to the rosemary bush every morning and hopped from branch to branch with a quick, purposeful energy that made her smile. They were always the same birds, and they were always different birds. She could not tell them apart. It did not matter. On some mornings, before the tea was finished, she stepped outside, not to do anything, just to stand in the garden for a moment and feel the air. In winter, the air was sharp and cold, and it smelled of wood smoke from the houses up the hill. In spring, it smelled of wet earth and the faint, green sweetness of things beginning to grow. In summer, it smelled of tomatoes and warm stone and the lavender that grew along the path to the gate. And in autumn, her favorite, it smelled of rain and apples and the particular sadness that is not really sadness at all, but a kind of tenderness for things that are ending. She stood there and she breathed, and she went back inside and finished her tea and washed the cup and put it on the rack to dry. It was not a meditation. She would not have called it that. It was just the morning. She went to work. She was a librarian. The library was small, 3 rooms on the ground floor of the old town hall, with tall windows that let in the afternoon light and shelves that smelled of paper and dust and something faintly sweet, like vanilla, that old books develop over decades. She shelved books and helped people find what they were looking for and read during the quiet hours, which were most hours. She liked the work. Not passionately, not the way people talk about loving their jobs in interviews. She liked it the way you like a comfortable chair. It fit, it held her. It asked nothing unreasonable. At lunch, she walked not far, just around the block, or through the small park beside the library, where there was a bench under an oak tree and a view of the mountain. She ate whatever she had brought, usually bread, cheese and apple. She ate slowly. She noticed the food, not because she was practicing mindfulness or following a technique she had read about in a book, but because the bread was good and the cheese was good and the apple was crisp and cold and tasted like autumn, even in spring. In the afternoon, she returned to the shelves. She moved through the rooms quietly, the way a person moves through a familiar house in the dark, knowing where everything is, not needing to look, guided by a kind of bodily memory that is older and more reliable than thought. She repaired torn pages with careful strips of tape. She wrote cards for the catalogue in her small, precise handwriting. She recommended books to the few patrons who asked, and she was good at it. Not because she had studied literature, but because she paid attention to people, the way she paid attention to everything else, quietly and without judgment. And she could usually tell what someone needed to read the way a good doctor can tell what someone needs before the tests come back. She walked home in the evening. The road from the library to her house took 12 minutes if she walked at her usual pace, which was not fast and not slow, but somewhere in between, the pace of someone who is neither running from something nor hurrying towards something, but simply moving through the world at the speed that feels right. She passed the bakery, which was closed by then, but still smelled of bread. She passed the stone wall, where the neighbor's cat slept every afternoon in a spot of sunlight that moved as the hours passed. And the cat moved with it, always in the warmth, always asleep, always perfectly content. She passed the fountain in the small square, where water ran over a stone basin worn smooth by decades of flow, making a sound like something between a whisper and a hum. The light was different then, lower, warmer, coming from the side instead of above, turning the ordinary streets into something that looked, if you squinted, like a painting. The kind of painting where nothing happens, a street, some houses, a woman walking, and yet the painting is beautiful because the light is beautiful, and the light is beautiful because it is temporary, and the temporariness is what makes you look. At home she cooked simple things, rice, vegetables from the garden, sometimes fish from the market, the small silver ones that the fishmonger wrapped in paper, and that still smelled of the sea when she unwrapped them in her kitchen. She cooked the way she did everything else, with attention but without intensity. She did not rush. She did not worry about the outcome. She chopped the vegetables the way they asked to be chopped, the carrots in rounds, the onion in half moons, the herbs torn by hand because a knife bruised them. She cooked and the food was good, and she ate it at the table by the window, while the last light left the sky, and the mountain became a silhouette, and the first stars appeared, tentative and faint, like thoughts you are not sure you are having. After dinner she washed the dishes. She washed them by hand, in warm water slowly. She had a dishwasher. She never used it. She liked the feeling of the warm water on her hands, the way the soap made small, iridescent bubbles that caught the light from the kitchen window before they popped. She liked the simplicity of the task. This plate is dirty. Now it is clean. This cup was used. Now it is ready to be used again. There was something in the repetition that she found restful. Not boring, restful, the way a heartbeat is restful. The same thing again and again, and each time complete. Each time whole. Each time a small, perfect circle, from dirty to clean, from used to ready, from finished to beginning again. She read in the evening, or she sat in the garden, if the weather was warm, in the old wooden chair that had faded from brown to grey over the years, and that leaned slightly to the left in a way that she had grown so accustomed to that a straight chair now felt wrong. Or she did nothing at all. She sat in the chair by the window and looked out at the night and listened to the sounds of the town settling. A door closing, a dog barking once and then falling silent, the distant murmur of the river that ran along the valley floor and through the town and out the other side toward places she had never been and did not need to go. She did not think of herself as happy. She did not think of herself as unhappy. She did not think of herself as practicing anything or following any path or achieving any state. She was simply living, one day at a time, one cup of tea at a time, one book shelved, one dish washed, one meal cooked, one walk taken, one evening watched from the window as the light failed and the stars came out and the mountain stood there, patient and vast and older than any thought she would ever have. And here is the thing about her life that is worth noticing. She had learned, without knowing she had learned it, every teaching we have talked about tonight. She let go, not dramatically, not with ceremony, but in the small way of someone who drinks her tea without checking her phone and walks home without hurrying. She understood impermanence, not as a concept, but as the light changing on the street, the seasons turning in the garden, the fig tree bearing fruit and then standing bare. She had tamed her monkey mind, not by fighting it, but by giving her attention to what was in front of her, the book, the bread, the warm water on her hands, until there was no room for the noise, because the silence was already full, She was compassionate with herself, not because she had decided to be, but because she had stopped expecting herself to be extraordinary and had found that ordinary was enough. She walked the middle way, not too much, not too little, not striving for perfection, not settling for carelessness, just doing what the day asked and letting the day end when it ended. She was grateful, not as a practice but as a way of seeing, the way you see light on a street and think, without thinking, that it is beautiful. And she was still, not the stillness of effort, but the stillness of a body that has stopped running, a mind that has stopped chasing, a heart that has stopped needing things to be different. She did not know any Pali words. She had never read a sutra. She could not have told you the difference between Theravada and Mahayana, or explained the Four Noble Truths, or described the Eightfold Path. But she lived the Dharma the way water flows downhill, naturally, without philosophy, without effort, without even knowing that what she was doing had a name. And that, perhaps, is the deepest teaching of all, that the Dharma is not something you learn. It is something you live, and you are already living it. Every time you pause, every time you breathe without thinking about breathing, every time you notice the warmth of a cup in your hands, or the sound of rain on a roof, or the weight of your body sinking into the bed at the end of a long day, you are already there. You have always been there. The teachings are not a destination. They are a description of where you already are. If this brought you some peace tonight, you are welcome to subscribe for more long-form audio like this, and share it with anyone who could use a slower night. Original commentary, stories and script, written and produced by Moonlit Dharma. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. And now, the night is yours. Perhaps you notice that your shoulders have already begun to drop. Just a little, just enough. They have been listening to these stories too. And somewhere along the way, without you asking, they began to let go of whatever they were holding. The jaw may have softened, that place where the teeth pressed together, where the tension lives that you did not know was there until it left. It may have loosened. The tongue may be resting against the bottom of the mouth, instead of pressing against the roof. The hands, wherever they are resting, on the blanket, beside you across your chest, may feel heavier than they did an hour ago. Not the heaviness of effort, the heaviness of release, the kind of weight that comes when the body finally trusts that nothing more is required of it. The breath has its own rhythm now. You do not need to guide it. You do not need to deepen it or slow it or count it. It is doing exactly what it needs to do, the way it has done every night of your life, carrying you from waking to sleeping and back again, without asking for your help. Perhaps you can feel the belly rising and falling, a slow tidal motion that is older than you, older than thought, older than language itself. The breath was here before you were born, and some version of it will continue after you are gone. And right now, in this moment, it is yours. It is keeping you alive. And it is not asking for anything in return. The body as a whole may feel different now than it did when we began. Heavier, perhaps. More settled, as if it has sunk a little deeper into the mattress, found a groove, a shape, a place where it fits. The legs are heavy. The feet are warm or cool, or simply there, at the far edge of the body, doing nothing, asking nothing. The whole of you is lying here in the dark, and the whole of you is being held by the bed, by the blanket, by the quiet room, by the night itself. You do not need to hold yourself up. You do not need to hold anything up. Everything that needs holding is being held. And the eyes, if they are still open, they can close now. not because they must, but because they want to, because they have seen enough for one day. They have done their work, looking, reading, watching, searching, scanning, checking, and now they are ready to stop. Let them close the way a flower closes at dusk, not suddenly, not with effort, just a slow, soft folding inward, a turning away from the light, a settling into the dark. There is nothing left to see tonight. Everything worth seeing is now inside. The stories, the images, the faces of people you have never met, but somehow recognize. The quiet places where the teachings live. The night is very quiet now. The stories have finished. The teachings have been given, and they are yours to keep or to forget. As you like, none of it needs to be remembered. The stories have done their work. They have washed over you like water over stones. And whatever was meant to stay has stayed. And whatever was meant to pass has passed. And you do not need to sort through any of it tonight. What remains is this: the bed, the dark, the breath, the slow, heavy downward pull of a body that has carried you through another day and is ready. Now to rest. You do not need to carry it. It has been carrying you, and now it is asking, in the only language it knows, the language of weight, of warmth, of the gentle closing of the eyes, to be set down, to be allowed to stop, and the silence, which is not empty, which has never been empty, which is full of everything, full of the stories you have heard and the ones you have not, full of the people you love and the ones you have lost, full of the days behind you and the days ahead, full of the mountain and the river and the garden and the library and the flute and the listening room and the old woman washing clothes in the morning and the carpenter repairing roofs in the rain and the tea cooling in the cup on the table by the window. All of it is here. All of it is in the silence. And you are in the silence too. You are safe here. You are welcome here. And the night which asks nothing of you, which has never asked anything of you, which has been waiting patiently all day for this moment, this exact moment, when the last resistance falls away and the body surrenders and the mind grows quiet and still. The night is glad that you are here. Rest now. Let the mountain hold the sky. Let the river find the sea. Let the breath carry you where it has always carried you, home, to the place where nothing needs to be done, where nothing needs to be fixed, where nothing needs to be understood. You are already there. You have always been there. And the night is soft, and the night is long, and the night is yours.